EU leaders hail a principal agreement with Turkey to tackle the migrant crisis, despite expressing their fears over a crackdown on Turkish media freedoms. Sports giant Nike suspends its contract with Russian tennis superstar Maria Sharapova after she admits to failing a drugs test at this year's Australian Open.
We have to walk very carefully because if we go a little to the right, we're in the line of sniper fire.
Locals in one district of Aleppo city in Syria find little relief from the truce as they increasingly suffer from terrorist attacks. On RT International, we report from the front line. Right now, midday in Moscow. Thanks for joining us on RT International. Here come your latest headlines. The EU and Turkey say they've agreed on the outlines of a broader deal to tackle the migrant crisis. European politicians praised what was called a bold plan from Turkey to stop illegal migrants.
The days of irregular migration to Europe are over.
This is a real game changer.
I think we do have the basis for a breakthrough, which is the possibility that in future all migrants who arrive in Greece will be returned to Turkey.
Turkey has set a high price for the deal, however. First, the sides have agreed that for every illegal migrant sent back to Turkey, the bloc will take one Syrian refugee from Turkish camps. Other demands might be more difficult to negotiate. Ankara is viewing visa-free travel for its citizens as early as the summer. It also wants talks on its membership to the EU to be renewed. And it wants the initial EU assistance of €3 billion to be doubled. RT's Peter Oliver has more on the pivotal summit in Brussels.
There will be another summit on the 17th and 18th of March, that's next week, where they're going to try and iron out some of the wrinkles, and there certainly are some quite big wrinkles in this deal. On paper, it all seems pretty great that they have come to some kind of arrangement. However, there's still the likes of hardline anti-immigration leader in Hungary, Viktor Orban, who very well may veto this deal. There's also bad blood in Ankara as well. We heard from President Erdogan wanting to know where the cash that the EU had promised previously was.
The EU said, we'll give you €3 billion in aid. It's been 4 months now, and we have yet to see anything. We're still waiting. The Turkish Prime Minister is in Brussels right now. I hope he returns with the money.
There are also other factors causing friction between Turkey and the European Union. Ankara's crackdown on opposition newspapers has ruffled more than a few feathers in Brussels. There's also even the possibility that this whole deal may not even be legal, this one-in, one-out situation that they're talking about, that for every migrant that arrives on a Greek island being sent back to Turkey, somebody from a Turkish camp would be sent to the EU. That's actually being challenged by the UN's refugee agency, and senior figures in that saying that if they push through with this deal next week, then we'll have to see what the European courts have to say. It is a step forward, it seems, when it comes to the dialogue, this deal, but there's still a lot of work left to do.
Turkey's methods of dealing with the refugees have raised a number of questions. Some reports have suggested Turkish guards have opened fire on Syrian refugees trying to cross the border illegally. We contacted Amnesty International for their take on the allegations.
We have seen people in their desperation trying to cross the border irregularly because the border has been closed to all but a handful of people, and this unfortunately has resulted in a spike in the number of cases of people being shot by Turkish border guards on the border. Now, the information received via Syrian doctors is that there were reports of 2 or 3 people being shot every day trying to cross the border irregularly. What Turkey says about its border policies is that it has an open border policy. Now, as Amnesty International, we've documented the fact that in practice the border isn't open, and in most cases the few border crossings that are open are only open to Syrian refugees arriving with passports, which is the very few.
During the summit, EU leaders also raised concerns about Ankara's media crackdown, particularly the issue of the Zaman newspaper. Still, politicians admitted that despite the increasing fears for media freedoms in Turkey, Brussels needs Ankara on side in order to solve the migrant crisis.
Freedom of speech and expression, one of the fundamental human rights. I am saying all this because we cannot stay indifferent to the concerns raised in this context about what is now happening in Turkey.
Nobody can accuse Turkey because of not having freedom of speech. Because if they have any doubt, they should see and check and come to Turkey and see the liberty of freedom of speech.
Freedom of the press is vital to all of us. Aside from that, Turkey has done a lot in terms of providing shelter and support for refugees. And if we want to protect our external borders, we need to work with Turkey.
The popular Zaman newspaper was seized by the government on Friday. It was a known voice of opposition to President Erdogan's ruling party. The takeover was described as one of the darkest days for press freedoms in Turkey and sparked protests that were ultimately dispersed by riot police. Zaman journalists want European officials to be aware of the threat.
Meeting with the Turkish Prime Minister, European leaders should not forget that while they bargain with Turkey's unprincipled government, other opposition newspapers will still be under threat.
And this was the scene outside Zaman's headquarters in Istanbul on Monday morning. You can see employees had to queue to enter the building due to security checks introduced after the protests turned violent. RT's Paula Sleer talked to other opposition journalists in Turkey to find out what they think about the media crackdown.
What is the feeling like in the newsrooms of opposition journalists?
People are arrested for speaking out against the government. There's a lot of pressure on the opposition media in Turkey, and a deep division between pro and anti-government outlets. We do not consider ourselves as opposition, because we're just doing our jobs. But state and pro-government outlets consider us as opposition. There are so many restrictions on anyone who's trying to tell the truth. We're trying to be optimistic, but who knows how this will all end.
As an anchor and the face of the channel, do you receive threats?
You know, there are viewers who are putting bad things, saying bad things about us or me personally. In the beginning, maybe you feel like, you know, what's going on? And you feel a little bit threatened. But if it gets worse, you began to ask yourself, what will I do? I mean, if I let my fear, then I cannot be doing my job.
This is the Image newsroom, one of the leading opposition broadcasting channels here in Turkey, but its license has been revoked. Who do you see as the voiceless today here in Turkey?
Today it's so simple that it was always the Kurdish people, but now it's not only the Kurdish people. Today it is everybody who is opposed to the government. They're all voiceless now because the mass media is not seeing what they are doing or what they are talking. So we are going to be their voice, and we will do our best for that.
After the raid of the Zaman newspaper, does this spell the beginning of the end for press freedom here in Turkey?
It's not beginning of the end. It has always been like this in the Turkey. If you are talking about the freedom, if you needed freedom, it was always the same. But today it's for the Zaman. Yesterday it was for the Kurdish media, or the day before it was for the maybe AKP government itself. They were closing their newspapers once a day. So it's not the end. It's never going to be the end, but it is an important breaking point maybe.
Why? Why is it a breaking point?
Because it was one of the most powerful newspapers and the best sellers.
What is the feeling like in your newsroom and in the newsrooms of opposition channels? Are people afraid to come to work, that there's a sense that any moment the government can come and raid the office?
We are not afraid because this is what I told before. We were waiting such a decision that they are going to close Image, or they were trying to close the Image. So nothing to be afraid of. We will find any other way.
Nothing to be afraid of, but it's certainly an optimism as Turkey faces an increasing crackdown on the freedom of press. Paula Sleer, RT, Istanbul.
And still to come here on RT International, safe shelter or discrimination? A decision to move gay and lesbian refugees to separate shelters splits Dutch society, with some saying politicians are simply sending the wrong signal. 10 past the hour here in Moscow. Sportswear giant Nike has suspended its relationship with tennis superstar Maria Sharapova after she admitted to failing a doping test. The company released a short statement confirming the decision, saying it will, quote, continue to monitor the situation. The former world #1 is the highest paid female athlete. Last year, she earned more than $29 million, including $23 million from endorsements and appearances. Sharapova admitted her mistake as she spoke at a news conference in Los Angeles on Monday.
I did fail the test, and I take full responsibility for it. I made a huge mistake, and I don't want to end my career this way, and I really hope that I will be given another chance to play this game.
My colleague Andrew Farmer talked to RT's Daniel Hawkins about what caused the tennis star to fail the drug test and how it could ultimately affect her future.
This substance that she took was actually part of a treatment that she had for medical conditions, according to her, for low magnesium, for the family history of diabetes that she had. She says she's taken it for 10 years. It's been given to her by her doctor. But this substance was actually banned by WADA back in September, and it became active in January. She said in that press conference she received an email to that effect on the 22nd of December, which she failed, obviously, to properly check, or her team failed to properly check, resulting in her continued use of this particular substance. So she went on to use it to play, obviously, in the Australian Open, and subsequently fail that test.
And tell us more, Dan, about this substance, meldonium, because it wasn't on the banned list, was it? It was fine, and then they decided to put it on the banned list from January onwards. Why was that? Can you talk about that?
Well, that's correct. I mean, meldonium is a substance, as you say, that's used to treat some medical conditions, angina, heart problems, issues to do with metabolism as well. But obviously some of the side effects of that medication include performance enhancement and an enhancement of the nervous system. It's effectively a stimulant that can also improve recovery after performance.
If it's misused, then the belief is obviously people can benefit from it. And there have been a few cases, haven't there, where people have tested positive since January.
This incident of Sharapova failing the meldonium test isn't isolated. Just over the last few weeks, we've had athletes from 4 different countries and 4 different Olympic sports failing for this particular substance. And there's speculation now, of course, that the adding of meldonium to the WADA list of banned substances could potentially lead to a whole spate of other athletes falling foul of this new regulation. In terms of Sharapova's future now in the face of this scandal, of course, there's speculation about how long a ban, indeed, if any, she could face if she is found guilty by WADA. If they don't take into account those mitigating circumstances we discussed, she could face a ban anything between 1 and 4 years, we're even hearing from some sources. So a very lengthy time indeed. And of course, in terms of her numerous, very lucrative sponsorship contracts, of course, she's a very well paid athlete, top 30 best paid in the world, probably best paid female athlete, certainly. That will have an impact on those sponsorship deals and indeed on her role as a UN Goodwill Ambassador. So not only a blow, of course, to the brand of Sharapova, but also another blow to the face of sport and tennis in particular.
A video has emerged reportedly showing dozens of ISIL jihadists deserting to a rival rebel group.
يعني دواعش شو دواعش ذبحونا ذبحوا ما قام يقول لك يا كفرونا.
Now, we cannot independently verify this footage, but the militant being interviewed is showing what appears to be his ISIL ID card, while a line of other deserters can be seen marching in the background. An analyst from the Clarion Project, a think tank specializing, I should say, on radical extremism, told us earlier the increasing pressure on ISIL is forcing cracks amid the jihadist ranks.
There have been consistent reports of people leaving ISIS over the past year or so. So it's not a new development, but what the individuals who defected from ISIS said was that ISIS was mistreating them, called them infidels, did not trust them. So what that means is that there's a sense of fear and paranoia within the Islamic State that is causing members to turn against each other. This happens a lot in terrorist groups where they start questioning the person to their right and the person to their left of being a spy, of being about ready to defect and switch sides. It indicates that ISIS is feeling pressure, so it's very positive.
Now, it's not only in Syria where Islamic State has found itself under intensified pressure. These are the latest pictures from the Anbar province in Iraq, where Baghdad is close to cutting off ISIL's supply lines in the west of the country. It comes after the US and Iraqi military announced plans to launch an offensive against ISIL's major stronghold that is now in the city of Mosul. Now, the ongoing ceasefire in Syria is bringing very little relief for this particular Kurdish-populated district of Aleppo city. Wedged between rebel-held areas, the district of Sheikh Maqsoud, controlled by the Kurdish YPG fighters, remains under bombardment. RT's Lizzie Phelan reports.
All throughout the streets here in the Aleppo neighborhood of Sheikh Maqsoud, houses have been reduced to rubble from missiles coming from the other side of the front line. Just yesterday, a house just like this one over here has been completely leveled by gas jars. An entire family of 7 people were killed when the house collapsed on them.
We saw something flying towards the house, and then there was an explosion. The building collapsed in just a few seconds.
Amongst the ruins, there's still the fresh blood of the victims of that attack stained on the walls and the remains of this family's home. The scale of the destruction is enormous here. I'm counting 9 buildings that have been destroyed or partially destroyed. We're hearing gas jars falling very frequently, even now, just a couple of minutes ago.
It was definitely al-Nusra. The only reason all of these people were killed is because they lived in a district of strategic importance.
So we've got front lines on 2 sides of us, one to my right over here, and one behind me over that way. So we're kind of in the line of sniper fire here. So we have to walk very carefully because if we go a little to the right, we're in the line of sniper fire.
For us, the truce has not changed anything. In fact, it's even worse than before. The terrorists have intensified their attacks.
Been here for a couple of hours and I can't tell you the amount of times that we've heard gas jars exploding all around us. We felt the walls in the buildings we've been walking through shaking from those gas jars exploding. So certainly not feeling the ceasefire here, and the YPG fighters say that in fact things are just as bad as ever. Now they say that they've been respecting the ceasefire. They haven't been going on the offensive, even though they claim that Jabhat al-Nusra, which of course is excluded from the ceasefire, is on the other side of the front lines. But the ceasefire certainly isn't being respected from the opposition areas, as we've been hearing all around us. They're very much continuing to attack this area.
All right, time for a very short break here on RT International. When we return, though, we take a look at the brand new migrant measures which have now divided parts of Dutch society.
Most people think to stand out in this business, you need to be the first one on top of the story, or the person with the loudest voice or the biggest ratings. In truth, to stand out in the news business, you just need to ask the right questions and demand the right answers. Question more.
This is Boombast, and these are the stories we are tracking for you today.
I think that the euro is severely undervalued.
That's the highest output in over 3 years.
What the Fed really wants is inflation.
The U.S. has more than doubled imports from Iraq.
All that debt that was accumulated, they have to pay it off.
And when you see oil go down, our economy goes down.
What do you make of that data, and what does it really mean for the average worker?
Tuesday headlines, thanks for joining us. Refugees in the Netherlands may have fled war zones, but now some of them are having to flee asylum centres. Gay and lesbian refugees have been subjected to death threats and attacks in the supposed safe houses. So now Dutch lawmakers have given a green light to move them to separate centres. The move won a narrow majority, with MPs ultimately divided on the issue.
Attackers should be dealt with. There should be consequences for their asylum applications. And when it is not clear who the culprit is, we still need to protect victims in such cases.
When you say we're going to give separate shelters to gays, Christians, women or whoever else, then you are sending the wrong signal. These would compromise the core values of the Netherlands, under which we all live together.
The motion was put forward following reports of gay refugees being targeted at Dutch shelters. There have been 70 reports of threats and harassment since October last year, and the move will also allow separate accommodation for Christian asylum seekers. The issue has divided not only MPs, but also parts of Dutch society.
I think it's very right and proper.
Under Dutch law, and Dutch law will be enforced, and it has to be enforced from day one, right from the start. So it has to be made very clear that discrimination against gay people, against homosexuals or against women will not be admitted. So it's clearly a wrong signal to act against the victims, put them aside instead of acting against the perpetrators of these threats.
All right, to some other global headlines for you now in brief. We'll start with Tunisia, where attacks on police stations and army barracks near the country's border with Libya have killed now more than 50 people. 28 militants, 10 soldiers and at least 7 civilians were killed in these clashes. It is the second deadly standoff in the area in less than a week. Authorities have imposed a curfew around the military facilities that were targeted. Up to 2,000 farmers took to the streets of the Italian city of Turin, accompanied by their cows. They're angry about milk prices, which have been forced down by big business. Farmers say it's putting their livelihoods at risk. They want the government to intervene and put pressure on the corporations. The FBI has issued new guidelines instructing high school students across the country to report on fellow pupils who criticize the government or who meet any of an exhaustive list of criteria that supposedly indicates that they might be a terrorist. RT's Caleb Mopan went to the streets of Washington to find out how people feel about these new guidelines.
The FBI lists a number of behaviors as indicating that a teenager is a potential terrorist. Among them is taking pictures of a government building, talking about traveling to places that sound suspicious, or using private messaging apps on their cell phone. These may sound like normal behavior for American adolescents, but the FBI is urging teens to report on their peers who are doing such things. If you take a picture of a federal building, you might be a terrorist. Do you agree with that?
No, I don't. You know, people probably come here all around the country to see the White House, so you'd think that they want to take a picture for remembrance.
Well, there's no way of knowing what people's intentions are when they take a picture, but I would probably postulate that the majority of people taking pictures of federal buildings are unlikely to be terrorists.
There's a possibility. I think it's kind of overreacting, but there is a possibility.
So do you think there's a bunch of potential terrorists here today taking pictures of the White House?
No, I don't.
Yeah, you don't trust the report?
No, they're not terrorists at all. They might terrorize us in the classroom, but that's it. They don't terrorize anybody else.
The FBI website lists a variety of categories as extremist ideologies. Among them are animal rights and anarchism, two causes that are quite popular among high school students. The report could be interpreted as meaning that high school students who so much as go vegan or start listening to punk rock music should be viewed as potential terrorists. Do you think people who read about animal rights are terrorists?
No.
What about people who read about anarchism? Are they terrorists?
No.
What about people that read about abortion? Are they terrorists?
Nope.
What about people who read about gun rights and the Second Amendment? Are they terrorists?
Nope.
I think it's a good idea for high school students to be reporting each other to the FBI.
I mean, I guess if there's a legit case that they suspect something, you know, like even the case in California, some people saw some stuff and they didn't report it. But yeah, I mean, if you have a discernment, yeah, I think you need to report.
How do you feel as a father knowing that high school students now are being encouraged to report on each other to the federal government?
I don't like it. I don't like it at all. I don't like anybody reporting on anything unless it's something real for real. Now, if somebody's making threats, hey, I get it. You know what I'm saying? Handle that business right then.
The question must be asked, will this make us any safer? Shouldn't young people be encouraged to challenge and criticize? And is it a good idea for potentially millions of young people to enter the world of adulthood with an FBI file? Caleb Maupin, RT, Washington, D.C.
All right, up next here on RT International, Dreams of the Nutcracker, a documentary on what it takes to become a professional ballet dancer.